What will be the consequences of last Friday's bloodbath at the Gaza border? The death toll has now climbed to 17, with hundreds of Palestinian demonstrators shot with live ammunition. It was Land Day rallies, some edged too close to the border fence. Why the killings? France has called on Israel to show restraint, while the United States has vetoed a UN resolution calling for an international inquiry. As the 70th anniversary of Israel nears, is Washington's backing enough for Benjamin Netanyahu's government to maintain, well, a state of permanent status quo with the Palestinians? What does the future hold? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the backlash over Gaza. With us to talk about it, Michele, editor-in-chief of Causeur, columnist as well for Yediot Aharonot. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
From Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, member of the PLO's Central Committee. Joining us from Tel Aviv, Ronan Bergman, New York Times staff writer and author of Rise and Kill First, The Secret History of Israel's Target Assassinations. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And from London, Tarek Bakoni, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Your upcoming book, Hamas, contained the rise and pacification of Palestinian resistance. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate. On Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Let's start with the latest. A 29-year-old member of Islamic Jihad's military wing succumbing to injuries sustained in Friday's clashes near the Gaza city of Khan Yunis. That brings the death toll to 17. And while Amnesty International has condemned the use of live gunfire, which has left more than 700 wounded, Israel's defense minister taking the opposite tack on the shooting that erupted hours before the start of the Jewish holiday of Passover.
To summarize the aim of a Hamas terror march. So first of all, the holiday passed quietly. No one approached the fence. None of the IDF troops were hurt. No national infrastructure was damaged. Our troops deserve a commendation for doing their job the best way possible.
Michele, those remarks saying everything went past quietly as a result, justifying, in fact, it seems, the shooting death of those 17.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that before Israel, people were quite nervous about was supposed to happen, because it's a nightmare if you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people just marching on the fences and then just spreading around in Israel. It's uncontrollable. It's something that the army should have stopped almost at any cost. So the fact that there were relatively few casualties, according to Israeli sources, 2/3 of them were militants. According to the Hamas, 5 or 6 of them were militants. So it's a third. It's, of course, this is not the best of the results, but it could have been much, much worse had they arrived in huge numbers to the fences.
Mustafa Barghouti, your thoughts on what happened last Friday?
This was a totally peaceful, non-violent demonstration, and we are absolutely happy that finally Hamas and other Palestinian groups have adopted what we've been advocating for 16 years, which is to stick to non-violent popular resistance. The whole world has been telling us all the time, why don't you march in thousands peacefully, non-violently? That's exactly what happened. And the people who were shot and killed mostly were killed inside Gaza and not at the borders. And it was not a small number. I don't know if for your guest 17 people killed is a small number. And if 752 people shot with live ammunitions, 45 of them could also die, that is also a small number. If there were 3 Israelis killed, this would be a very big number for him, probably. So I don't think this approach of differentiating between people in a racist manner is acceptable. Let me tell you that today, in the West Bank, not in Gaza, Israeli army has shot with live ammunitions 5 Palestinian demonstrators, 4 in Nabi Saleh, 1 in Ramallah, and another one in Tulkarem. 6 people shot with live ammunition just because they were also peacefully demonstrating. So this practice of the Israeli army is not only happening in Gaza, it is also happening in the West Bank. It happened in Jerusalem when we also had very peaceful demonstrations, which were organized by civil society, not by Hamas. And then the Israeli army killed 5 young people and injured no less than 1,500, many of them with live ammunition. This is a behavior of colonialists. It's unacceptable. No country that claims to be a democratic country would use live ammunition and lethal weapons against peaceful demonstrators. It is unacceptable.
Ronan Bergman, what's the public mood right now in Israel after this?
Well, I think Israelis are much concerned with the possibility that this would continue and that the IDF would be just facing another yet challenge of tens of thousands of people marching and, as Hamas promised, crossing the fence to Israel. This is by far a problem that the IDF, I don't know if the IDF is able to handle. There are 2 different challenges here. First, to make sure that these, from the IDF point of view, to make sure that these people do not cross the fence. And if tens of thousands cross, then of course this will be something that the IDF is not able to stop. And the second, and I think this is also one of the reasons some of these people were killed, were that in past demonstration, as the last one, Hamas has used the existence of such demonstration to plant some of his own people armed inside the riots, inside the peaceful protesters, in order to mobilize them and have them as close to the border and cross the border in order to conduct guerrilla operations against the IDF. The general move in Israel defense establishment, as well as the Israeli public, is of major concern that we are facing the beginning of yet another outburst of violence that might evolve into the third intifada.
All right, and to understand the problem, just to remind our viewers, this is all happening, of course, at the border with the Gaza Strip. 1.9 million people. The Gaza Strip, where Israel pulled out all its settlers in 2005, often described as the world's largest open-air prison. Nadia Massi has more.
Therefore, formally declare Israel admitted to membership in the United Nations.
1948, the creation of Israel, a Jewish homeland. A moment of celebration for many, but for the Palestinians, it's the start of their Nakba, or catastrophe. Tens of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes, and some ended up here in the rural coastal territory of Gaza. More joined their ranks in 1967 when the refugee numbers swelled after the Six-Day War. Today, Gaza is a small, overcrowded strip of territory largely locked off from the outside world. At 360 kilometres squared, it houses nearly 2 million people. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from the territory, and elections 2 years later saw the Islamist group Hamas take power. International isolation followed. Fatah in the West Bank severed its ties, and Israel and Egypt imposed a crippling economic blockade. Hamas's response is often to fire rockets into Israel, and the tit-for-tat violence has 3 times spilled over into devastating wars. Today, living conditions are difficult. Unemployment sits stubbornly at 45%, with youth unemployment far higher. Last October, Fatah and Hamas agreed a tentative reconciliation deal, but despite the breakthrough, there's been little relief for those still stuck in the Gaza Strip.
Tarek Bakoni, it just seems that everybody's stuck when it comes to how you deal with Gaza and what the solution is.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think we need to think about the wider context here. It's actually quite misleading to suggest that these marchers are moving towards a border. You know, the Gaza Strip isn't a sovereign entity that happens to be besides Israel. The Gaza Strip is actually defined by international law as occupied territory. Israel continues to be the occupier of the Gaza Strip, even though it disengaged in 2005 and withdrew its settlers. It still maintains effective control. It maintains all forms of access into the Gaza Strip, and it maintains the population registry. So not only is Israel not allowed to claim self-defense under international law against unarmed marchers, it actually has a responsibility to protect the civilians under its control. And we see from its use of excessive force that that's never the case. This latest march is only one example, but there are numerous over the past few months examples where protests both in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, as well as in Gaza Strip were met with armed responses from Israel.
Yeah, because the criticism that's leveled towards the leadership who organized these marches is that it would be seen as a provocation, holding those rallies so close to the border.
Well, but that's the thing is, this is not a border. This is a fence, a highly securitized fence that is meant to maintain civilians penned up within the Gaza Strip. What you said at the beginning of this opening was absolutely right. Israel believes that it can maintain permanent status quo. The status quo has to be managed every few years, and we see that through excessive use of violence. Every time there's some unrest coming out of the Gaza Strip, Israel uses excessive force in order to try to pacify the population in the Gaza Strip. They expect to be able to maintain absolute calm on the southern villages and towns surrounding the Gaza Strip without easing any kind of restriction of access into the Gaza Strip. The situation is unsustainable.
I saw left-wing columnists in Israel, Gil Michele, saying for once it wasn't armed militants firing rockets, and yet Israel responded with gunfire.
Well, first of all, some of the people that marched were armed. There are photos of at least 2 people died with arms in their hands. And the jihadic Islam claimed that one of the dead was theirs, and the Hamas that 4 or 5. So even according to the Palestinians, a third of the dead were militants, some of them armed. But, you know, the larger picture is that the Palestinian Authority, we saw in the movie a few minutes ago that Nakba, the Palestinian disaster of 47, 48, well, the Palestinians used the term Nakba in June 2017 to qualify the taking over of Gaza by Hamas in 2007. So in Ramallah, people see Hamas just like the government in Jerusalem. They even put pressure over the Gaza Strip for the last few months. They cut the fuel, they cut the electricity, they cut the salaries to their civil servants in Gaza. Ramallah is cynically putting pressure on the Gaza. In they are negotiating an arrangement with Hamas, and they are pushing the Gazaris to provoke Israel because they know that everyone will blame Israel. And the last thing I want to say, this march is called the March for the Return. And this is the basic element of everything. There's a huge misunderstanding. When in the West we hear the word return, we think of refugees returning to their homeland. The people there that were marching to the fence believed that they will return to their homes, to the 4 walls and a garden they abandoned 70 years ago. Homeland is a political solution. This is something that we can see, maybe not this government, but other governments. Returning to the home is just impossible. This is the destruction of Israel. So there's a kind of an ambiguity, and Israel, more and more Israelis understand that when Palestinians, most of the Palestinians, or many of the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, say return, it's returning to their homes and not returning to their homeland.
All right, but for the time being, we're not seeing any negotiation over what that term means between the two sides. Mustafa Barghouti, your reaction on the point made there by Gil Michele about the internal problems with the Palestinians. Last month, there was that roadside bomb during the convoy that was passing of the Palestinian Prime Minister when he was in Gaza. Is there a link between the internal divisions among Palestinians and the rallying around the cause over what happened last Friday?
Well, I really appreciate that you are devoting this time to this issue, and there are several points that have to be clarified, and I will try to be fast. First of all, I am in Ramallah, and I am in the, as you said, in the Central Council of the PLO, and we don't consider Hamas an enemy like Israel does. Hamas is part of the Palestinian people. They are part of the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And we don't think that describing them as terrorists is the right way. We've been in dialogue with them, and they have responded by accepting our approach of nonviolent resistance. And this should be praised and appreciated. Would Israel prefer that they would come with guns? They are now coming with flags. What is better than that as a best form of struggle? That's one first point. Second point, Israel is still really occupying Gaza, as was said. Israel is controlling all the passages to Gaza and putting Gaza under siege since 2006, which is leading to sorry?
And Egypt.
Yeah, Egypt has only one entrance, but Israel is the overriding authority because Israel controls the airspace, Israel controls the sea. If anybody goes beyond 6 miles into the sea of the fishermen, they would be shot at. In February alone, Israel shot 26 fishermen because they crossed that line. Israel can send their planes anytime, and they do send their planes all the time. But one fact that is not known is that although Gaza is a very small place with 360 square kilometers and 2 million people living there, the most densely populated area in the world, Israel is keeping 1/4 of Gaza as buffer zone that is prohibited for Palestinians.
Mustafa Barghouti, I'm going to have to cut you off very quickly. We have to take a very quick break. We'll pick up where you left off when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the blowback from the violence last Friday at the border between Israel and Gaza. 17 Palestinian militants killed, more than 400 wounded by live ammunition. This during Land Day demonstrations. With us to talk about it, Michele, editor-in-chief of Causeur. We're joined from Ramallah by Mustafa Barghouti, member of the PLO's Central Committee. From Tel Aviv, Ronan Bergman, New York Times staff writer, author of Rise and Kill First, the secret history of Israel's targeted assassinations. I want to ask you more about that in a moment. And from London, Tarek Bakoni, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, author of Hamas-Contained: The Rise and Pacification of the Palestinian Resistance. Just before the break, Mustafa Barghouti, we were asking about several narratives, right, that are happening at the same time. You have the protests at the border with Gaza. You have internal divisions among the Palestinians. And, of course, you have the upcoming 70th anniversary of, for the Israelis, what is independence, for Palestinians, what is the Nakba, the catastrophe.
Yes, what I was saying is that very few people know that Israel is prohibiting Gazans from entering 25% of Gaza Strip itself. And the people who were shot yesterday were mainly shot in that area. And they were shot at even before the last demonstration. So it is unacceptable that this is happening, because the Israeli siege on Gaza and the fact that this form of occupation still continues is leaving Gaza with 95% of its water completely polluted or salinated. People have electricity only 6 to 8 hours a day. 80% of the young people in Gaza who are graduates of universities are unemployed. And it is a disastrous situation. But let me also explain one thing about the issue of Palestinian refugees. These refugees were forced out of their land in 1948 when Israel was established during the war. 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees. When they speak about their right of return, they are reiterating the United Nations resolution, which said in its resolution 194 that Palestinians who were displaced and their dissidents should be allowed to go back to the land they were evicted from. And this was an issue of negotiations where Israel and Palestinians should have negotiated the matter. But Israel suspended practically the whole peace process by insisting on building illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. And the compromise, which was supposed to be on the table, which is two-state solution, was killed by Israeli illegal settlement activities. That's why we have a disaster here. Israel claims that it is a victim in this conflict, but in reality, it is the side that is occupying the Palestinians. It is the side that has transformed 51 years of occupation into a system of apartheid and racial discrimination, much worse than what prevailed in South Africa. The road to peace is simple. End occupation, end the system of apartheid, allow Palestinians to be free in their independent state, and you will have peace with them. But continuing with settlement building, continuing with occupation, will only enhance the conflict. And one last point very quickly, about live ammunitions. They use lethal weapons. I am a medical doctor. And in '96, during one demonstration, I was trying to stop the bleeding of one person who was injured. An Israeli sniper shot me twice with live ammunitions. I still carry 37 shrapnels in my back because of that act. So the behavior of Israeli soldiers is that it is okay to shoot Palestinians, and that should be stopped.
Ronan Bergman, let me ask you, in your book, you describe two sides, or more than two sides, but in the case of the Israelis and Palestinians, both who feel these existential threats. And here you have something that comes up quite often is what is moral, what is right, and everyone has their own logic, it seems, in that book.
Yeah, that's the problem with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's no one who is 100% right or vice, and no one who is 100% wrong or blessed with only good deeds. The problem is both nations carry 100% of the responsibility for these 120 years of bloodshed between the nations. I completely think that the only way to solve that conflict is by the two-state solution, but at the same time, in referring to what Mr. Barghouti just said, the organization which controls Gaza, Hamas, specifically, overtly, says that they would not satisfy in the two-state solution. They encourage terrorism inside the territories. They want to overthrow the Palestinian Authority and take the rule in the Judea and Samaria and the West Bank as well. They Palestinian security just arrested numerous terrorists of Hamas that wanted to create another outburst of violence, and they say that they will not stop it until Israel is destroyed. So just trying to explain the mindset from the point of view of the Israelis. Once Israel is facing a regime in Gaza that in its root said that they will never accept the existence of Israel, they claim that there are many Israelis who believe that there is no partner at the other side. At the same time, that sense, that narrative, that mindset is used by the Netanyahu government to justify not doing anything in order to promote reconciliation with the Palestinian people, discourse with the Palestinian Authority that would lead to a truthful, peaceful negotiation. And this is the problem, that both sides carry this burden of blame, and both sides believe that there is no partner at the other side.
Yeah, and just want to ask you about this, Ronan. Last week, they announced some preliminary census figures. There are now 6.9 million Israelis for 6.5 million Arabs, with Palestinians becoming more numerous than Israelis, perhaps as early as 2020. You say that you believe the two-state solution is the only way to go. Why do so few Israelis in the current government agree with that, it seems, or at least do little more than pay lip service to it?
I think that if the current government continues with its policy and the support to its policy, then they are leading to only one thing, and this is the end of the Zionist dream, to have a Jewish or a Jewish majority in the border of a Jewish state. Of course, that will have equal rights to its Arab inhabitants, and having equal number of Palestinians and Israelis and Jews between the sea and the river is just making it more and more difficult to create a two-state solution. And going back to your question, why don't people agree? Why don't people see that? Some coming from a religious point of view that are under the belief that God has gave us this land, and they expect some sort of a miracle. And some, I think, under the belief that the narrative that we have given, which is wrong, but they still believe in that we were right, we did only good, we, the Israelis. We gave the Palestinians all chances, and as Abba even once said, the Palestinians never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Arafat was given the opportunity to build a two-state solution, to build a Palestinian state, and they have returned only with suicide bombers and terrorism. This is partly true, but of course, as said, the blame is on both sides. I think that the two-state solution is the only solution, but I'm afraid that the two nations will take another outburst of bloodshed and war until the majority at both sides will reach that conclusion, unfortunately.
Gil Michele, you agree?
I think that the turning point was 2005, 2006 in Gaza. When Israel withdrew unilaterally, it was far from what the Palestinians demanded.
Well, they withdrew the settlements.
They withdrew the settlements, and the Palestinians had a choice: either to destroy everything because they didn't get what they want, because it was far from what they want, or seize this chance and create a dynamic, because the government at the time only wanted to see that it works in order to continue and implement it elsewhere in the Palestinian territories. What happened was that Fatah lost the control of Gaza because of its own failures, corruption, because Dahlan, which was the head of the Fatah in Gaza, wasn't capable of maintaining power there. And then when Hamas took over, very quickly there was the first tunnel, they kidnapped the soldier Shalit, they provoked the crisis that led to the crisis in the north.
That was then what you had.
For Israelis, what it means is that for the Palestinians, nothing will ever be enough. That there will always be those refugees who will not settle for a political compromise because they want their home, they want their house, they have the key, and they will not settle for less. So,
but we know, we've had this discussion before about how during the Oslo Accords, people knew that there could be a financial transaction when it comes to the right of return. It's not necessarily mean that you literally have to take back the homes that you're...
No, I think that what I think is not important. I think that many Israeli voters believe that there is a critical mass of Palestinians that when they will discover that there is a peace with Israel, which doesn't include their house in Jaffa or in Migdal or wherever in Haifa, they will burst in violence. They will not accept.
Mustafa Barghouti, very quickly on that.
Just like in Algeria, the Evian Treaty was never implemented.
Mustafa Barghouti, very quickly.
Up till now, and regardless of what has happened, the vast majority of Palestinians accept two-state solution based on 67 borders. I assure you that even Hamas is ready to accept that. The question is, why after signing Oslo Agreement in '93, Israel continued to build settlements in the West Bank? If West Bank was going to be the Palestinian state, why build settlements in the West Bank? That was the thing that killed the peace process.
All right.
We had 111,000 settlers before Oslo Agreement. After Oslo Agreement, we have 750,000 illegal settlers who are very aggressive and who are trying to... This is the group that is killing the two-state solution. And let me clarify here, you can't equate between Palestinians and Israelis. Israel has nuclear power, has the largest army in the region. Israel is the most developed economically. Israel has huge power. it is the side that can help achieving peace, really. We are occupied, we are oppressed, we are under a system of apartheid. But I'm telling the Israelis, if you kill two-state solution, which you are doing now, the only alternative will be one-state solution. Yes, one democratic state solution, in which case it cannot be Jewish only. And then a Palestinian could be the prime minister of that state, because of if it is a real democratic state. We are trying to offer them a compromise, which is two-state solution in West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem. And they are refusing that.
They're refusing
and
that.
They are killing. What Israel is doing is compromising the compromise.
I want to just, because time is running short, talk about the spillover effect. And it's being felt here in Europe. The events that take place in Israel do have an impact. And what we're seeing is arguments within the political parties playing out a little bit differently from one country to the next. Let's first talk about the UK, where it's been a weekend where the opposition Labour Party has found itself embroiled in an anti-Semitism row. There was rallies and counter-rallies outside of Parliament last week. Over the weekend, there was a resignation of the national executive of the official in charge of Labour's disputes panel. This over allegations that Christine Shawcroft opposed the suspension of a candidate accused of Holocaust denial. There was also the backing out of a party donor. Is Tarek Bakoni, is anti-Semitism on the rise where you are?
I think just give me a chance to just correct two things that happened in the first debate, because I wasn't given that chance, and then I'll answer your question. The fact about Hamas's acceptance of the two-state solution: Hamas last March issued a political document accepting a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. This is more than the charter of the current Likud government, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu has accepted. So it's quite misleading to suggest that Hamas hasn't accepted the creation of a Palestinian state in 1967. And the second thing that was quite misleading that was said, which is that Israeli policies towards the Gaza Strip are a response to Hamas. Israeli policies towards the Gaza Strip started in 1948. There have been 12 wars on the Gaza Strip since 1948, more than 3 decades before Hamas was even created as an organization. And the reason why is because the Gaza Strip presents an exceptionally challenging reality to the Israeli attempt to maintain Jewish majority while retaining control of the Palestinian territories. Ariel Sharon's decision to disengage in 2005 was precisely to offset the fact that maintaining the Gaza Strip under Israeli control with its 2 million non-Jewish inhabitants could undermine Israel's Jewish majority. So it's important to maintain both those things in context.
And just tell me about, because time is running short, Tarek, about the political climate inside of the UK and inside of the Labour Party with divisions over the Middle East and accusations of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely, and those accusations are extremely serious, and there is a sense that the Labour Party has not taken sufficient action in order to address concerns of anti-Semitism, which of course it must do so seriously and in the most efficient way possible. There has been a number of studies that have been put forward to address this situation and to carry out investigations within the Labour Party. Unfortunately, the issue of anti-Semitism has become extremely politicized here, and there are efforts on both sides to conflate any criticism of the state of Israel and to conflate any anti-Zionist positions with anti-Semitism, which has unfortunately muddied the water. And it is now incumbent on the Labour Party to take very strong policies against anti-Semitism while maintaining its ability to define what anti-Semitism is and to maintain its policies vis-a-vis Israel.
Yeah, that brings us to what's happened here in Paris last week. There was a march that followed the stabbing death of a Holocaust survivor. It turned political when the leaders of the far right and far left attended over the objections of one Jewish umbrella group, the CRIF. Let me ask you about this, Gil Michele, because that organization, the CRIF, I heard one of their spokespeople the morning of the march equating criticism of Israel, and this is the leader of the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, we're seeing in those images, equating his criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism.
Well, there are three issues. There's criticism of Israeli policies, of Israeli government. There is anti-Zionism, and there's anti-Semitism. There's nothing wrong with criticizing Israeli policies, Israeli government, and almost half of Israelis are currently working on it. As for anti-Semitism, theoretically, you can separate it from anti-Semitism. You can just say that either the Jewish people is not a nation or the Jewish state is illegitimate or whatever. The problem is that practically almost all the manifestations or most of the manifestations of anti-Semitism are either connected or the border is unclear to anti-Semitism. So in theory, yes, you can separate.
So you're saying the waters are being muddied on both sides?
Practically, when you meet this phenomena, they are so near to one each other, interpenetrating, and many times kind of anti-Zionism is the facade for anti-Semitism. This is what happens concretely in real life, most of the cases.
Was it a mistake by that group to try to dissuade the leaders of the far right and far left from attending that march?
It was a huge mistake. My paper took a stand, a clear stand. We thought it was a huge mistake. We thought that anyone who felt he should be there should have been welcomed. And it was a mistake to not only not to invite them, but to treat them the way they were treated.
And more broadly now, when you look at what's going on with this impasse in the Middle East, can Israel today just rely on the United States as their only real strong partner abroad when it comes to the UN Security Council and the like?
First of all, there aren't any other candidates. Imagine that Israel decides to drop the American alliance. Who is Israel should turn to? Russia, the European Union. So this is a logical choice, and we mustn't forget that in the big picture, Israel is winning the battle. I'm not saying the war. Israel is winning the battle because for many years, what was the main weapon of the Palestinians is that they put themselves in the center of the issue, and they had most of the Arab world with them. Now, for the Arab world and for the rest of the planet, the Palestinian issue became a minor issue. There's the Iran question. Israel has good relationship with Egypt, with Morocco, with the Gulf states, some of the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia. So things are changing rapidly, and geopolitically, the Palestinians who were the center of the show, they became a nuisance.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're out of time. But there was so much more to say. And I want to thank Mustafa Barghouti for joining us from Ramallah. I want to thank as well Tariq Bakoni in London, Ronan Bergman in Tel Aviv, and Gil Mahali. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.